30 minutes or however long you like. Okay, no, or less. Good. Less. Yeah, you definitely. Yeah. So 15 minutes or however long. Open it up for Q&A, do the Q&A, and then we'll have Erik. Erik will speak after you.
Yeah. You the MC?
Great.
All right, good. So you see him, when he's done, then you'll introduce me.
Yeah. Good. Sounds good.
And are we live yet?
Not sure.
Oh. She was just here. I heard her say it was all set, so okay, good. Awesome, there she is.
So okay, good.
Yeah, we're live, so you just listen to every setting up.
Yeah. Michael, do you want to now for anyone else? Every week? Oh, cool. Yeah.
That's very well.
Yeah. Yeah. This one we promoted more as an open house. We don't normally have Erik speak at every week, so this one is a bit more having you and Erik together. It's a bit more special.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I got big feet.
Pizza and coffee. It's a winning combination. That's it, Ricky. Yeah. Okay, guys, welcome to your Friday Tech Talk. Cool. So we're very glad to have Nate Taggart here. Just to introduce him, he started a startup here in Portland. What was it?
6 months ago.
6 months ago. Wow. Okay, sooner than I thought. It's called Stackery, and recently they even got $1.75 million in funding to back them up on that. And so it's definitely growing, and he's here to tell you about it and to tell you about himself. So let's give him a warm welcome.
So thanks for having me. CEO of Stackery. Stackery helps software engineers ship serverless infrastructure in production. I'll dig in a little bit about what serverless is, because it's a new technology that I think could be interesting to talk about. But I wanted to start and tell a little bit about our company. We officially organized in November, so it's been a fast ride. We went through Techstars Seattle, so we spent 3 months in Seattle going through that program, which is pretty intensive. We just got back to Portland about a month ago. We've hired our first engineer, Michelle, who's a graduate of the Tech Academy, so super excited about that. We were successful in raising money. We just closed our seed round from Voyager Capital, which has an office here in Portland. They're one of the leading regional VCs. And we currently are hiring for 2 open full stack node positions. So put that out there. Help us spread the word. I'd appreciate that.
All right.
So let's talk a little bit about serverless technology. I think it's a cool new idea, and it's growing very, very quickly. And it may be unfamiliar. It was unfamiliar to me even a year ago.
Wow.
Serverless is a type of architecture for the back-end infrastructure of an application that started with a product from Amazon 18 months ago called AWS Lambda. And the idea of Lambda is that you write code and you give the code to Amazon and it runs on demand. The idea of serverless architectures started out from this idea of like workflow, the event-triggered functionality. So for example, when someone uploads a file to an S3 bucket, you want to run a processing job on the file. Or when someone hits an API endpoint, you want to run code to respond to that. The idea was, developers want to create these workflows, create them quickly and efficiently without having to manage all of the infrastructure, the servers, or even a cluster, to build an application on top of. And that's because managing infrastructure is fundamentally a different skill set than writing applications. And so the more that we can abstract away components of infrastructure, the more we can enable people to build applications more quickly. So it started with AWS Lambda. It's now grown. Microsoft Azure has a product called Azure Functions. Google has an offering called Google Cloud Functions, and IBM is open sourcing an infrastructure offering called IBM OpenWhisk. So we're seeing big bets by all the major providers, which is the first sign that this is a real technology that's really going to gain momentum and grow. Amazon is a bit coy about talking about how much business they're doing with Lambda, and a big part of that is because Lambda is a new compute resource. It competes against compute resources that Amazon already has, like EC2 or the Elastic Container Service, for example. Nevertheless, serverless is growing very, very quickly right now. The recent Stack Overflow quiz, serverless was the number 1 or number 2 most interesting technology that developers wanted to work with. And so we're seeing a lot of companies bring serverless into their place of work. And one of the driving forces behind this is there's a category of businesses that are using technology that's fundamentally 5 or 10 years old at this point. This is maybe the first kind of generation in web architecture where we're actually starting to have like true legacy applications. As companies look to modernize their infrastructure, they're primarily trying to drive 2 big improvements. One is cost management. So rather than buying infrastructure, we move to the cloud so you can amortize it. And now even with cloud, when you rent a server, like an EC2 instance, you pay for the whole hour no matter how long it's running, and no matter how much traffic's running through it. So if your server is able to do 10,000 requests a minute, and you're doing 10 requests a minute, you still have to pay for that whole capacity. So serverless turns that model on its head a little bit. One of the interesting features of serverless is you only pay for compute during execution time, so down to a fraction of a second. Which means that serverless scales up really well for big organizations, but also scales down really well for individual developers. So if you think about, you're going to build some new project, your choice is rent a server, pay for it all month long, maybe it's $30 a month or something. Or potentially just pay for individual transactions as they happen, and those transactions are a fraction of a cent. So a lot of developers are finding they can build side project applications for, maybe 50 cents a month or something. Instead of renting servers. So it's really interesting technology just to play with. But that's also really motivating for large organizations who are looking at their infrastructure costs as a growing part of their business and are saying, what can we do to make this more efficient? We want to be able to be provisioned enough that we don't go down. We want to be provisioned in multiple availability zones so that we're reliable around the world. But we don't want to necessarily pay for all this extra capacity that we have. So you can imagine a simple application. Maybe it runs a cron job every single night, and it takes 10 minutes to run. You have to pay for a server living to host this application, even though it's only periodically consumed. And so the idea might be that instead of spending $100 a month for that one application, maybe it's on kind of a beefy server, it's got a big batch job that does periodically. You now are only paying for those 10 minutes where it's actually running. So it drives costs. The other big advantage, which is pushing serverless into organizations, is speed of development. So a typical workflow at an organization might look something like this. Product manager says, here's a feature we want to develop. They get an engineering team in a room, they kind of spec out what it's going to take, and then they start to define the resource requirements. They go to their ops team or DevOps, site reliability engineers, and say, help us plan for capacity for this feature. What kind of infrastructure do we need for this? What's the deployment model look like? They whiteboard something out. There's a committee, decision-making process, and then they say, all right, we're going to provision the infrastructure. So then they have to write new chef scripts or puppet scripts or whatever. They deploy all the infrastructure, and that's the first time that a developer can actually push code and ship software for this feature. With serverless, a developer can write code and have it running within a few minutes. And because you're only paying for consumption, it doesn't mean that every developer can suddenly start spending tens of thousands of dollars on infrastructure costs accidentally. It's only going to charge them down to when the code's running. So you get this like rapid development cycle, but it's coupled with pretty dramatic cost benefits. And so large organizations, particularly enterprises that aren't classically software companies, are starting to embrace serverless. So these are companies like Nordstrom, Coca-Cola. Here in town, Nike's looking at it. Lululemon's hosting the serverless meetup in town. And so you see all these companies that you might not think of as kind of like bleeding edge tech companies embracing this new technology. And one of the big reasons for that is because these companies haven't necessarily embraced the prior most recent model, which was the container model. So if you don't have a DevOps team who's running Kubernetes clusters, you don't have a Docker-based workflow to spin everything up, you're probably still using a development release cycle that is fairly manual, fairly time-intensive, and requires a lot of planning. And so serverless is a way for them to kind of leapfrog a technology, get right up to the cutting edge, empower the developers, move quickly, and save money all at once. And it's with a technology that's actually super fun to use, really easy to get started with, and super powerful because it scales up very rapidly. Anytime an event happens that triggers your code to run, your code runs. Whether that's one time or 100 million times, it happens. And Amazon or Microsoft or Google automatically distributes your code to all their availability zones. So you don't have to manage any of that. So wherever it's being called from around the world, it will just run. So, cool technology, lots of benefits. Of course, there are problems. And Stackery is trying to solve these problems. So one of the problems is this is a new life cycle of managing and deploying applications. It's a new way to do it. It requires a new workflow, a new process. And there's currently not a lot of tooling in place to do this. So you can think of typical tools that you might use in building an application. You might have an infrastructure deployment tool like Chef or Puppet. You might have a tool like Jenkins or Travis CI or Circle, helping with your build pipeline. You might have monitoring tools like New Relic, monitoring app performance, monitoring the server. You might have logging tools, collecting logs. So you have all this ecosystem of support around your job of running an application. All of those tools don't work for serverless. This is a brand new thing, and so nobody's really supported this yet. Some of the tools will probably never work for serverless. A company like Puppet, which has a really great product for deploying servers, their product doesn't make a lot of sense when you don't have to deploy servers anymore. You don't have to manage them, you don't have to install them, you don't have to patch them. And so some of these ecosystem partners will probably, they'll continue to be successful in the server market, but they won't necessarily have a parallel offering for serverless, possibly ever, or at least for quite a while. And then there's companies like New Relic who might in fact roll out a serverless product. A lot of New Relic's monitoring happens at the application layer, and there are still applications running on serverless, and so you could imagine that they could presumably update their technology to support that infrastructure. So what Stackery is doing is helping to kind of tie together this ecosystem of problems and the supporting software that you want to have and build it into a serverless platform. So use platform kind of loosely. We're not like a Heroku. Our customers run their own AWS account. They continue to manage and own their entire application stack. What Stackery helps people to do is three things. We help you design, deploy, and monitor your application. So when I say design, this new model of serverless requires a couple of things that are kind of new. So one thing is you still have to deploy the code. That happens. But because you don't have a server, you can't necessarily go install your dependencies. So all of the dependencies that you have in your application be pre-bundled up, zipped up, distributed to an S3 bucket, and made available through roles and permissions to your serverless function. So that's a whole workflow that is today manual and we've been automating. Another example is that your serverless functions run in response to events, which means you now have to connect these Lambda functions up into individual event streams. So these could be things like an S3 bucket, when a file changes. It could be things like an API endpoint, API gateway is the Amazon product for that. Or it can be things, like in response to another Lambda or a message queue or a stream that is inside of your app, kind of distributing a workload around. So Stackery's product, we start out with an actual visual editor to drag and drop in an architecture design. So you say, I need a function, I need a database, I'm going to put them inside of a network, I'm going to create an API endpoint, and I'm going to wire them together. And you can design, when someone calls this API endpoint, I want this function to run. This function is going to be able to connect to this database. And essentially define what your architecture looks like, and then hit save and deploy. And we create that infrastructure in your AWS account. So we do this by building CloudFormation templates. So CloudFormation is Amazon's product for essentially defining what your architecture looks like. You can configure all of their services through CloudFormation. And it kind of looks like a big JSON blob or a big YAML file or something. And it's pretty complicated to work with. One, because you essentially have to master all of the underlying services you're calling. So if you say, for example, like I want my code to run inside of a private network, that's kind of an easy logical construct to define. But then you have to know how to set up, IP routing tables and subnet masks and distributed availability zones for your network through CloudFormation. So Stackery does all of that automatically. You say, I need a network, I want to run this function in it. We automatically will configure all of the underlying conditions that are required to implement your design. Once you've designed your application, we create the CloudFormation template, and then we push it into your AWS account, and you can go through a review cycle where you can approve it, say, yes, I want to actually run this, implement it. We'll then create all the infrastructure. And this kind of transitions into the deployment phase of our product. So when we're in the deployment stage, we do things like set up all the right IAM rules and permissions so that each of your functions can talk to the things you've told it can talk to, but it can't do anything else. So we're kind of creating a security box around your code as it's been designed. We do that automatically. We're also doing things like configuring environment variables. So a common pattern in software design is that you have certain secrets, keys, passwords in your application. Your application has to know, but you don't necessarily want to hard code it into your application because then it's in your repository and then everyone has access to all the secrets. So a typical way to approach this is that you would have some kind of server environment, variable list. So that you would say, this is my production server, I'm going to look up my production database key and I'll connect to the database. There's no server to go install all these environment variables on. So Stackery has an automatic environment management system so that you can define there's a secure way to essentially define, here's my key value pair, my secret name and my secret value, and your application can reference those secrets. So you can, in your code, say, I want to use my production database password here, and then behind the scenes, Stackery will provide your application with that password at runtime without you having to hard code it in. As we deploy out your application, we do something which is kind of unique and a little bit tricky, which is that we wrap your code in a function of our own. This happens behind the scenes, it's transparent, you don't have to do anything. But what that allows us to do is actually monitor your code at runtime while it's executing on AWS Lambda. And this is important for our monitoring features. So one of the things that we want to be able to do is we want to be able to capture any errors that are happening in the application. We want to capture them because, again, there's no server monitoring that you can install. There's no way to log into the server to review any of the error history. And so we have to actually get that before the Lambda dies off. So by wrapping your code, what we can do is we can say if there's any uncaught error in your application, any unhandled error, it will surface an error object to us. We will grab that object and then add it to an event stream. So what the event stream allows you to do is essentially create another Lambda function that just listens for events. So any event throughout your app, or any error throughout your application will get caught by our handler and then surface back to you so that you can react to it however you want. So common ways to handle it might be listen for the error stream. Whenever there's an error, log it to my errors handler system. Another common pattern though is to do a retry. So lambdas are, by their very nature, they're time-based, they're short-lived. The longest the lambda can run for is 5 minutes. It's designed to be a fast executing bit of code in response to an event. So if you have code that tries to run for longer than 5 minutes, lambda will throw an error. You can in fact even create smaller increments of time. You can say, I want this code to time out after 30 seconds. It's actually a good defensive mechanism. This is a good way to ensure that you don't accidentally have code that just creates a bunch of execution time accidentally. Gets stuck on a process or it gets in a loop or something. You want to allow it to keep running. And so this timeout can be really helpful, except when it times out, again, it dies and you don't necessarily know what happened, why did it time out to die. So again, we can capture that and treat it as an error. We surface it into this errors event stream so that you can listen to it. So the other thing you might commonly want to do is retry that. You might say, hey, maybe it was an aberration, maybe I got a bad instance or something. If I get an error that was a timeout error, I want to just run a retry and do it again. So Stackery is doing design in terms of how do you architect your system and plug everything up together. We're doing deployment. How do you create that in the real world? How do you implement that in your own AWS account, including things like bundling up your dependencies, setting up the IAM roles, managing environment variables. And then we provide a monitoring solution so that at runtime, as your application is live and in the wild, you get to know and react to any errors in your application, collect logs out of your application, and throughput metrics of your application. So that was a lot of stuff. I get that. New technology is really interesting and it's still evolving. And I think as an industry, we're all still learning what do we really do with this thing, how does it work, where do we take this. Today, the common use case for Lambda is, there's a few of them. So a typical one is a background task. So say, for example, you have to work some queue. You just run a queue and a task queue and you run tasks periodically. Or you have like a cron. Every night at midnight, I want to run this real quick. This is common use cases. The other one is workflow trigger things, like when a video file gets uploaded, I want to transcode it. So that's where the industry has been so far today. The kind of next wave that we're seeing companies implement is Lambda-driven APIs. So Lambda is actually a really great infrastructure method for an API. API traffic tends to be spiky, tends to be unpredictable. With Lambda, you don't have to predict what your throughput's going to look like. You don't have to know how many servers to provision in advance. And you don't have to pay when it's slow traffic, right? It's also, short-lived, very transactional kind of model, which again fits an API design pattern pretty well. What we expect to see, and we haven't seen a lot of yet, and again, it's early days of this technology, but we expect to see entire applications being powered by Lambda. Lambda fits the web traffic pattern very well. You expect a response to be returned back in a few seconds or less, right? So these very short-lived transactional responses are really well suited to Lambda-style architecture. Now there are some tricky bits about doing that. One of them is managing state of the application. So with a server application, you have access to memory that's persistent, right? Or at least persistent from request to request. And so it becomes relatively trivial to manage state. With Lambda, you have to be a little more thoughtful about managing state. So a typical way to do that would be to use a database. So all of your state is stored in a database. Every single Lambda function looks up the state and then instantiates itself correctly. The other common way to do this is with a queue or a stream-like system. So you take a message, you put it on the queue. Later, something else can take a message off the queue, and in this way, you can kind of pass state through messaging across your application. I think as some of these problems, like state become solved. I think it's some of these problems like, how do I manage a large-scale application? How do I manage deployment of hundreds of functions rather than just one application? As soon as these problems get solved, I actually expect we're going to see more and more application development happening on Lambda. Lambda's certainly ready for it. The technology can handle it. So a lot of what's missing is just the industry figuring out what are the best practices, how do we do this, and how do we use this successfully. If you want to get started with Lambda, it's basically free. You get a pretty good number of free requests a month through Amazon's free tier. So it's also you can use Amazon has their own console, so you can literally like type your code in directly into Amazon and press go and watch it run.
They still have the 12-month screen running around too.
Yeah, totally. Totally. So it's a easy product to get started with. It won't cost anything. A good project that I might recommend starting with is you can build Alexa skills. If you have an Amazon Alexa or an Echo, they now have the little Echoes that are like $50. And you can basically train your Alexa to do new things, and it's all of the skill is actually powered by an AWS Lambda. And again, you can run those for free. So it's a fun little weekend project. You can essentially create a free AWS account, set up some Lambdas to do some things. The documentation for Alexa is pretty good, actually. The AWS documentation is not always that good. But the Lambda one's pretty decent, and particularly if you Google Alexa skills, it's pretty good documentation. It's a fun starting place, and we're in town. We're just a couple blocks away. So if you start using a lot of Lambda, we'd love to hear about it and learn more. Cool. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah, sure.
Cool. So we're going to open it up for some Q&A. Any questions or?
Talk a little bit about your technology stack, particularly the open source that you use it.
Yeah, so we started with an open source project called Node-RED, which is our front end kind of interface. Node-RED comes out of IBM, and it's essentially it's kind of like a Visio diagram interface. So you can drag and drop nodes and then wire them together, and we use that as like the application map that you define. Our backend, surprise, surprise, is running on Lambda, and we're pretty much exclusively a Node shop, so Node end-to-end. Lambda today supports 4 languages. It started with Node. We added Python, C#, and Java. Azure Functions also supports those, but also supports Ruby and PHP. So there's, if you want to try different languages, there's solutions for it. Yeah.
You mentioned that you have wrapper functions or wrapper applications for these other things. Is it a generic wrapper, or do you have to customize it for each one?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So it's generic, and the developer doesn't have to do anything.
Oh, great.
So there's some wrapper functions. There's different products that use this kind of technology, where you essentially have to like invoke the function around your own code. So you would say, for example, you pass your function in as an argument.
Oh,
Is one way to do it. I mean, the other way to do it would be to literally like define a function, which is the wrapper, and then write your code like inside of it. Our method is different. We don't do that. So my co-founder Chase and I came out of New Relic. New Relic does the same kind of function wrapping methodology. That's how they can measure performance of an application. And so we use a technique we developed at New Relic, which essentially is very abstract, kind of generic technique, so that we don't impact the application at all. In fact, we so much don't impact the application that if you throw an error and we catch it, we will rethrow the error. And we will make sure that error still gets through. So we don't modify the behavior of the application at all. What the wrapper really allows us to do is introspect the code that you've written as it's running and do things like catch errors. It could be, we don't do this today, but it could be extended to things like track the performance of the application, collect like runtime variables and like harvest them. We don't do any of that, but like that, the same technology could be used to do a lot of cool stuff within an application. Any other questions?
Yeah. So are you guys going to be marketing this technology, selling it to companies, or are you expecting companies to come to you, or how are you?
Oh, we're just going to open our doors and
Yeah.
flood in. I can't wait. It's really exciting. So yeah, I mean, we expect, we'll be promoting it to companies. Our focus is very much on like enterprise, big organizations. The technology is, it's generic that anyone could use it, but the real, it's easy enough if you're deploying one Lambda. It's not too bad, right? If you need to package up your dependencies for one Lambda, ship them out, run this code, not a big deal. The complexity comes when you're doing this with hundreds of functions and you have dozens of developers and kind of managing this whole like new workflow. That becomes pretty tricky. And so we're focused on solving the problem for enterprises who are trying to roll this out across entire teams or divisions. The market's still pretty early. So a lot of the conversations that we have are, we try to talk to companies who are at least kicking the tires on serverless. Like I don't want to start from zero. But a lot of times, they're just starting to look at it. They have zero Lambda applications running. And they don't necessarily even know what all the problems are that they're going to run into. On the other end of the spectrum, there are companies who really started day one with serverless, and they're 12 months, 18 months in. They do have running production, and they've had to solve a lot of these problems for themselves. So we're seeing companies at different maturity stages. But right now, I think there's like 1 or 2%. Like at the time of meeting, 1 or 2% is in the market, and there's like 98% of companies coming behind that are eventually going to get there. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for Okay, great. And so our next speaker is our co-founder, Erik Gross, who's actually going to speak to you guys about getting into the industry and what it takes to do that. Let's give him a hand. Hi. Hey. Wow, a lot of new faces. It's nice to see y'all. So I wanted to be able to give you a little bit of insight and wisdom into how to get that first job. Some of you won't be your first job in technology. I understand that. We have people that come through who've already got some sort of experience in the industry. But most of you, when you get to the end of the program and you're trying to get that job, it'll be your first time getting a job in the technology industry. Now, there's some things that apply to any kind of job you're trying to get. But there are certain peculiarities about getting a job in technology, and there's something about getting that first job in a pretty technical field that you don't have any experience in. And so I want to give you just some successful actions we've developed over the years on how to get that done. Some of this is covered in our job placement course. We recently did a bit of a revision to that, and some of the content I'll go over today, when you hit the job placement course, you'll see me talking about it again. So I know you love to hear me talk, so you'll be getting a bit more of that later on as well. So I want to talk about a couple intangible aspects of getting a job. What I mean by that is there's tangible things. There's like how do you actually format your resume, and and how do you do a good phone interview? What format should you answer certain questions in? If they're going to throw you the generic, where do you see yourself in 5 years? How do you figure stuff like that out, right? Those are all tangible, and you can talk about it a lot. I want to start somewhere right behind that, and that is your viewpoint, your attitude going into the job search. I personally believe that this is a lot more important than any of those tangible things. And this isn't an easy thing we just tell you to do a certain thing. It really is the kind of thing you need to look within yourself and figure out for yourself what kind of point of view do I want to have going into my job search. I want to give you what I believe to be sort of like a recommended viewpoint to adopt. And that recommended viewpoint would be that my chief value, this is the kind of thing you tell yourself, my chief value comes not from the technology experience I might have or not have, but more from how I approach work and problem solving and people. Again, these are intangible things. The reason I say this is, when you're going in for your first job in technology, you're not going to be arriving with a 5-page resume and all this detailed technology experience. You're not going to be able to look at this and go, man, there's 5 different places in my organization I can use this guy. I see he's got experience in AWS. I see he's done API development. He's done a bunch of architecture. They're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have probably a relatively short list of technologies that you feel comfortable with. They're not going to be hiring you primarily because you're a technology expert. So why are they even going to hire you? They're going to hire you because they like you. They're going to hire you because they see something in there where they go, wow, when we have to teach this person, because we're going to have to teach this person, we feel like they would actually cooperate, like they'd be a willing part of that teaching process.
Now, what do I mean by that? Because you're all here and you're all students. What I mean is, and we probably all experience this, every once in a while you bump into somebody that when they're given a piece of data, their immediate reaction is to counter it, to come up with all the ways it's wrong. You ever work with anybody like that? I've been that guy sometimes, okay? I think we all have. But if it's a general character trait, that's really not a person you're going to want to work with. Now, if someone's an extremely experienced senior developer and they have to have retained that character trait, don't know how they would in this industry, because we like to work with people that are nice people, right? But if they're an extremely experienced guy, you can sometimes, make the judgment call, all right, we're willing to deal with the fact that the person is relatively difficult to deal with because of everything else they bring to the table. I don't really think that's a great way to work, personally, but I've seen people hired that way, where management makes a decision, all right, we're just going to kind of bite it on this one because we need what that guy's got, so we'll try to work with him. You can't be that guy when you get your first job, and you should be that guy. So this is why your point of view about how you approach life and work is actually going to be one of the senior things when you go to get a job, because it comes across. When you're in the interviews, you are bound to make technical mistakes. You're actually a lot more bound to make them when you're relatively new. I still make them when I get interviewed, and it's always rather humbling, but this is why you get hired. They're not going to expect you to get every question right. What they're looking for is about 4 or 5 different factors. You're going to ask questions. They might be written questions, they might be in front of a whiteboard, it might just be you're talking to some of the folks in the dev team. They're going to ask questions, and you're going to hit a point where you just flat out don't know the answer. Or you think you do, but you're not sure, and you don't want to open your mouth and look like an idiot, right? They're really looking to see how do you handle that. How do you handle the fact that you don't know something? If you internalize it and really get hung up on the fact that you don't know the thing and get all nervous, probably not a good sign. Why? Because you may have this idea that there's all this stuff you don't know. And you're going to be in an interview and they ask you a thing you don't know. And you go, oh man, I don't know that, and I'm going to look like an idiot. If the table's returned and you have an opportunity, no pressure, to just ask that developer what he or she doesn't know, they could go on for hours and days. I could tell you hundreds of areas of technology that I don't know about and I want to know about, but how can you? So they are looking at you a few years before when they're interviewing you. They're looking at, oh wow, I was there where there was this giant sea of things I didn't know, and I was worried and intimidated by it. Well, now I find myself several years later, that sea is much smaller. So they're not going to take it personally or see it as a huge bad sign that, oh my God, the person didn't know the technology. Or the technical question that you ask. They're certainly going to take it in a bad way if your response to that is to become nervous or apologize or just break down and fall out of the interview. Rather, they want to see, how do you handle it? Now, I can't tell you how to handle those things. I can't be in there in the interview with you. And I'm not saying I always handle it perfectly or that any of our graduates handle it perfectly. But I can tell you what I've seen to be a successful point of view, and that is, wow, I found a thing I don't know. Cool. What is it? How does it work? Is it interesting? If that's your point of view rather than, oh man, another thing I don't know. Oh, this is, whew. You're going to do well. You're going to do well. Now, this can only go so far. I recognize the fact that if you go in for a job interview and they ask you 5 technical questions and you bomb all 5 of them, you can be the nicest guy in the world. They're probably not going to hire you, okay? But I bring up to help you with that point of view, that orientation when you first go into that interview. It's like, okay, it's almost guaranteed I'm going to hit things I don't know. Okay, good. That's actually fine. It's okay. So the other thing is that they're looking for in the interview is, how do you think? What's your approach to things? And this is another reason that we encourage our students to get experience all the way through the program in explaining concepts, whether it's through these written diagrams and sketches or explaining to an instructor or putting up on a whiteboard, getting used to explaining how things work. What we are trying to do is create a graduate that when they're being interviewed and a person asks them about a certain thing or says, hey, can you come up with, well, here's what I got asked. They said, all right, you're running a pizza joint, and you need a piece of software that keeps track of all the different menu items and the size combinations of the pizzas, and combines them all into an order so you can display order information on a screen. What would your database look like? Now, the thing is, they're not asking you to design the entire database. They're not asking you for perfection in all of your syntax on your columns and their data types and all the, if some of you aren't up to database, I apologize, but all the different restrictions there might be on joining different tables to each other. They're not looking for that. They're looking for how do you think? How do you approach the problem? Which means you should talk a fair bit. You should explain what your thought process is. And if you find yourself explaining a thing and going down a rabbit hole and you hit, oh, wow, that's actually wrong. Again, don't get flustered. That's fine. They want to see if you take yourself down a logical thought path and arrive at the end and go, wow, there's no way out of this maze. Are you willing to eat a little bit of crow and go, man, no, that's not right. Roll back, find out where your assumption was wrong, right in front of them. In other words, they're looking for, can you be wrong in front of them? And how that be okay? Because we are wrong 99 times out of 100 as developers. And it's that 100th time where you're like, woo, got it, that's great. Okay, good. If you're going to break down on 1 through 99, somewhere in there, you're not going to make it. And they know that because they're developers. So they're looking for the person that, when they hit a wall and go, wow, my logical thought process failed me. Somehow that is the right thing. Roll back and go, oh, yeah. This is where. And then go on down another chain of thought. They want to see that type of approach more than, oh my God, he just like right down there, boom, got it. Every single question answered perfectly. If we find a guy like that, we're like, waiting for the shoe to drop. The guy's perfect. The girl is perfect. Are you really? Can it be that way? Because we know we're not that way. There's always things we come up with like, yeah, I don't really know that. I'm going to have to get books. So I think I've covered that point enough. It's a matter of your viewpoint going in and your willingness to acknowledge the fact that you made a mistake, because we all do. Roll back, have that be okay, and just move forward with it. Okay. So there's a few other aspects. These are more tangible things in terms of getting that first job. I think the biggest one is a certain degree of tenacity and unkillability. And what I mean by that is you're going to get told no a lot. You're just going to get told no a lot. We've graduated hundreds of people now, and we've had hundreds of people get jobs. The number of times their first offering, their first application they made out of the gate, and the first interview, and then the first in-person, it all went through a perfect line, and they got hired. It hasn't actually happened. We haven't had that perfect scenario. So the chances of it happening for you are probably pretty low. So I'm asking you to be willing to acknowledge the fact that you probably get told no a lot during this job search. And frankly, it might be 5 times, 10, 15, 20. We've had people do 20, 25 different applications and get some part of the way through, phone interview, maybe even in person, almost all the way to the end, and get told no. What's the hallmark of the people that made it? They're unkillable. They're like, well, that sucked. That was not a lot of fun. I really thought I had that job, and it went somewhere else. Okay, I'm going to take 5 minutes, and then I'm going to put on my big boy pants, and I'm going to jump back in. If you're willing to do that, you will get the job. It's tenacity. It's unkillability. It's your certainty that what you bring to the table is valuable, that you are a valuable commodity somewhere. And when you find that right fit, you're going to go, oh, wow, awesome. And they're going to go, oh, wow, awesome. And now you're mutually engaged on building something and putting something together and getting a show on the road. It's a blast. Leading up to that point, you're not going to be part of there getting a show on the road. And you're going to have gotten to know that company, and you're going to want to work there, and then they're going to say no, and who isn't going to get disappointed by that? So prepare for that. Prepare for a little bit of disappointment. And frankly, if that's actually something that causes you some degree of alarm right now while you're hearing it, if you go, man, I know me, I know how I've conducted my life so far, I really don't do well with that kind of no thing, here's my advice to you. When you get to the job placement course, do a lot of whiteboard interviews. Talk to the job placement directors here and say, listen, I can just predict that I'm probably not going to do very well with getting no or getting things wrong or being embarrassed by things. Can we just drill the heck out of that? Can you maybe have me twin up with one of my fellow students or something like that, and just over and over again go through that process where I get asked questions, and a lot of them I'm not going to know, and I just learned to deal with that. Or can you even, please, Mr. Job Placement Director, can we mock up where we're doing that interview and the person tells me I didn't get the job? Can we do that, please? Because if it is something, this is just part of taking full responsibility for your new career. If you know that that's the thing that's not going to go very well for you, then handle it. Think far ahead and go, okay, what do I do to make sure that I've got the best possible chance of navigating this thing that's going to make me all kind of nervous as well as possible? Now, again, that's just one idea. The point is to be creative about it and to acknowledge where you're strong and where you're weak. And where your weakness comes in is these soft skills and these intangibles of going through the interview process and dealing with the embarrassing stuff. If you know that's an issue for you, and it isn't the technical stuff, listen, you go through the course is just fine, you know your technical data, but you know this is the thing, well, work with us. We'll help you through that. So, a couple final notes on getting that first job. Networking is huge. It's a huge thing. And this also bumps right up against some points of view we can have about embarrassment and reaching out and opening yourself up to people's judgment. Get out there, meet people, go to meetups, meet people who are developing new companies. If you have a connection anywhere to any kind of a technical company, just introduce yourself and get in communication. In other words, be willing to reach outward into your environment to a massive level, a very, very high level. Every once in a while, we have people that are going through the job placement course, and they get to the point where we tell them the actual number of resumes that we recommend they send out, and it's a lot. And they're like, that's way too much. I shouldn't communicate to that degree. Yes, you should. You should. Now, again, I can't tell you what to do. I can tell you what works and what we have a demonstrable history of. What are the successful actions? And our observation is those people who are willing to communicate to a very wide area and are willing to receive anything that comes back and not have it defeat them, they do very, very well. So the lesson in all that, communicate widely and a lot, whether it's your resume, your phone calls, your emails, whatever it is, be willing to communicate. And that will help you get that job as well. Besides, this is my point of view, if you bump into a person who really doesn't like when people communicate a lot, is that the place you want to work? It'll be kind of an odd thing. Wow, the person over communicates. They're actually too interested in a job. I kind of like that. I'm like, yeah, the person really wants it. So, again, I want to just stress something. These are all opinions. These are all just my opinions. They're based on what's worked for me and what's worked for our students. But at the end of the day, they are just an opinion. Nothing in what I just went over should ever lead to you questioning whether or not you should violate your own integrity. If you know something's true for you, then just run with it. But I am asking you, if you get to that job placement portion and you're running into any kind of difficulty getting this job, just take a look at this talk, take a look at the materials in the job placement course, and when you go through those materials, if your point of view about what it will take to get a job starts to shift and you change your mind on some things, be willing to change your mind. At the end of the day, it's better to be wrong on the thing that you thought, but have that great job, than right on the thing you thought and still looking for work. So I think that's even more right, is what that is. So that's my little talk on the point of view about getting a job. When you get to the job placement course, you'll learn lots of the nuts and bolts on how to put stuff together, but it's the point of view that I think is seen to everything. So I could open this up a little bit on Q&A if people have some questions about this, or actually it's been a long time since I was speaking in front of the student body. I'm willing to open up the floor to any kind of questions if people want to ask them. Anybody got anything? And it's completely fine if the answer is no. Yeah.
How do you recommend tailoring templates?
Okay, so for those of you who are listening from abroad, he asked, how do you recommend tailoring cover letters? There's a bunch of different schools of thought on this. I'll tell you two things. One, what I do, and two, the more prevailing school of thought. My cover letters are quite short. They're 3 to 5 sentences long. And 2 of those sentences are almost always the same thing because you're introducing yourself and your basic sort of identity. My name is Erik Gross, I'm a senior .NET developer. You gotta have that in there, right? What I look for in those, this is me, what I look for in those additional 3 to 5 sentences is, when I did the homework on this offering, this company, what did I find that interested me? and it isn't always what you think. It isn't always going to be, oh, they use the exact stack of technology that I really love. That might be it. It can, but it's anything that actually interests you. I'll give you an example. I was looking at the job ad a couple of years ago, and in diving into the website, I looked for who their chief technology officer was and saw they had a blog. And I clicked on the blog. I'm like, what's this guy writing about? And there was a recent entry in there that was just extremely well written. It was a fantastic set of data. I was like, that's the kind of thing I'd like to teach my students. That's really, really cool. So when I wrote the cover letter, I didn't refer to anything about their company at all. I referred to that blog post because that's what I was interested in. So this isn't to say, okay, good. So the thing I should do, because Erik said I should go check out the blogs of all the people with jobs that, positions looking for. No, that isn't it. And I don't think that that's what you're getting out of this. It's what interests you. Write about what interests you, because you can't fake that. It's genuine. And when I've hired a lot of people, and when you get a cover letter and you can tell that what you're getting isn't canned, that came straight from that guy or that girl. That's something that's true and original to them. It can be unusual in the conventional sense. You're like, why are they telling me about blah? But you don't find yourself asking that. You go, oh, well, that's really cool. I actually have a sense of who this person is. And that person will stand out. That's my recommended approach. Now, the things you'll hear in terms of like the conventional wisdom, just research the company as much as you can. Present all the highlights of why they should consider you. Those are fine, and there'd be nothing wrong with that. I like to write genuine, simple, real communication based on things that I have found interesting. So it's a long-winded answer. Write about what interests you. Does that help? Good. Absolutely. Oh, wait, there's a fellow over here.
Yeah, I had a question. How many students have come through Tech Academy?
He asked how many students have come through Tech Academy. We're over 200 graduates right now. So I don't know if we're at 210 or 250. Yeah. The last official count I had was over a month ago, and we hit 205, and I went, oh my God, we officially have hundreds of graduates. Because I'm a grammar Nazi, and that's not true. Okay. So yeah, that, on the order of a couple of hundred. Yeah.
Okay. And that's since 2012?
Yeah. I mean, the early people were me just tutoring before I even incorporated Tech Academy. That was me. I need junior software developers. I'm like, I've got all these side projects. I need people to help me on this stuff. So I find someone bright and say, okay, here's the basics of what you need to know just to help me on this, right? They liked that. Actually, we were about 6 of those people, and they all went on to work in technology. So I did something right. But from the point where we're in actual school, that's about spring to summer 2013. Yeah. And like any startup, you start real small. Our first office was at an incubator out in Beaverton, and it was a really great setup. You had, here's the men's bathroom, here's the women's bathroom, there's a tiny little closet of a room in between with a printer from 1998 that was about half the size of the room. You can have that, Erik. That'll cost you a grand old $50 a month. Okay, so we moved in and we started with that. Which is just a lesson. Then we're going to start a person here. You just start. You just start. It doesn't matter. You're not going to have perfect to begin with at all. You just start. So it's not really what you were asking about, but I'm pretty proud of where we come from. To be able to start next to a printer that was bigger than the room almost. So, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Absolutely. I'll get you. You had a question?
Yeah, I think when I think about the getting into the job first stage,
Yeah.
what's making me most anxious is the idea of having work to show for myself and building a portfolio page. So, given, say, we have something to show,
Yeah.
the project, how many is enough? How much weight do those get? Because I see myself just saying, oh, I'm not going to set up resumes yet because I need more projects and they need to be perfect.
Okay, just again, that's a good question. For those of you who are outside of the room, essentially he's asking, he's saying that the thing's got a little bit of tension on his part when he gets to the job search. If I get this wrong, correct me. Is essentially, how much demonstrated work am I going to want to put together in terms of portfolio to really feel confident in going into the job search? Is that kind of what you're asking about?
Just how much weight is that given to even get you in front of it?
That's the next thing I was going to address. You also asked how much weight is that given in terms of getting that job. Okay. I need to go on the Wayback Machine on this part because I'll be honest, when you're a senior software developer, they aren't often looking at that stuff in great detail. They can see, IBM, and you look through the, okay, this guy is worth pulling in for an interview. Okay. So it actually does have a bit more importance and weight towards the early part of your career. This is my reality. Okay, it may not be others. As to how much, I can't give a number, but what I can tell you is this. It's almost always lower than you might think. And what I'm basing that on is when people have gotten hired out of here, they're getting hired because of who they are and how they interview. It goes back to the early parts of my talk. Okay? Now that isn't to say don't give any attention to your GitHub. Please put as many of your projects on there as you can. Demonstrate your code. Okay? But if you look at it and you're like, oh, it just looks like I just don't have enough, that's not going to be really the thing that they're looking at. If they talk to you and you're a nice person and you sound like you know a little bit about what you're talking about, you'll get that first interview if they have any need to fill the position. At that point, yes, they'll ask you technical questions, and they're probably going to dive into a few things on there, but they're not going to take a deep dive into your code and go, okay, now where's this example of a recursive function, and how well did he implement that? And okay, when he writes his loops, is he, what kind of protection is he giving against infinite loops? That's my experience. They don't dive too deep into that. If you have a GitHub account and it's got 2 little code samples on it, that's probably not a good sign. If you're going to do it and put whatever work you do on it. Would be my recommendation. Does that help a little bit? Okay, good. And yeah, absolutely.
So a portfolio or what you have is not necessarily going to be a criteria for even getting you in front of them in the first place.
I haven't found that to be okay. There's nothing cut and dried in this at all. Okay. Yeah, exactly. See, that's the thing is, they need to know. What are they trying to do? They're trying to prevent getting burned. They're trying to prevent someone walking in and blowing smoke up their rear end, quite honestly. Now, this isn't the normal thought process of you and I. We're not deceitful. We're not going to try to present a different picture. We're just saying, this is what I got, it's who I am, is there a fit for me? There are people out there who will frankly just put down the most flagrant of lies on their resume and arrive and hey, you can't really do that. And the pain inside the organization when that happens is incredible. Lost money, lost time, just irritation, inconvenience, betrayal, all that kind of stuff. Nobody wants that. So they do want to have some reasonable security in what they're doing in terms of the hiring. If you're an experienced developer, you've got this resume, they'll make a couple calls to some people you work with and okay, we trust what's on here. And so there's one of my job placement directors actually correctly pointed out, in the absence of a lot of experience, you do want that. You do want that. I will say this. This is a long-winded answer. I'll just say this. The work you do here at the Tech Academy, if you're putting all those code samples out, you're going to be fine when you get to that point. Does that help? Okay. Absolutely. You got a question?
Oh yeah. So you're doing networking, doing a lot of networking. Sometimes it feels like it's not focused enough. But there are ways to be more focused in a networking kind of scenario.
Tell me what you mean by. He's saying he's been doing a lot of networking, and sometimes it doesn't feel quite focused enough. Explain what you mean by focused.
Well, I'll go to a meetup where it's specifically for the kind of job we're looking for, and chances are it might be a hiring manager, that kind of thing. Sometimes it seems kind of scattered.
In terms of the attendees and what they represent?
Yeah, well, it's you never know what you're going to get at a meetup. And,
yeah. No, this is a good question. Again, my opinion. Okay. Any opportunity you get to meet another person that's in any way connected to the industry is a potential job for you. And you rarely have a direct connection between, it's that person, and wow, 4 weeks later I find myself working with or for that person. That's extremely rare, actually. Okay. Rather, it's 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's who does that person know, and who does that person know, and who does that person know, and they were, that's how that works. So that's one thing to know, is it isn't, you can say it's who you know, but it's really who can you communicate with, who knows somebody, who might know somebody, who might know somebody. That has been factored for me several times. A lot of our students got hired. But I will say this: if you're in a room and there's anybody in the technology industry, then you could take advantage of that. But taking advantage of it, to me, means what can I find about this person I'm talking to that I'm interested in, that genuinely interests me about them. They're not interested in you yet. They don't know who you are. For you to attempt to tell all about you and what it is you've done and what you're trying to get done, sometimes honestly it's like as welcome as a dead cat at a wedding. It's like, why do they care? If you genuinely want that person to be interested in you, my experience is, if you're sincerely interested in something about them and you ask, that's what does it. And it cannot be faked. It can't be faked. It just has to come from you. So my most successful action when I've gone to a lot of, and I've been to a lot of these networking things, I've met a lot of people, it's crazy what kind of cool, amazing connections that come out of, I'll see somebody and they've got a NASCAR show. Okay? Now, it doesn't happen as much around here as I would like, but I'm a NASCAR fan, right? Don't judge me. So that interests me. Why? Tell me, who's your driver, right? I'm like, I'm now interested in that person. I sat down for an interview at a position a few years ago, and the guy had on I think I spoke about this before. He had on a T-shirt that talked about a specific organization devoted only to dark, bitter craft brews, basically. It was a beer shirt, but it was extremely like there's a thing here in Portland called Terminator Stout, right? And Terminator Stout is, you can put a knife in it, it would stand up, okay? It's one of my favorite beers. And so he's got this shirt on, I'm like, everything else in the room just appeared before me. I'm like, what's that? And so for 3 minutes, we talked about this whole convention he went to and all the different beers he tried, this and that. And I talked about this, English ale called Old Tom, and I can find it one place in town. And then we both realized, oh yeah, we're supposed to be interviewing. I got that job. I wasn't trying to get the job and ingratiate myself with him. I was genuinely interested in that. And you cannot fake that, and it means everything. It tells you so much about what you're going to be like to work with to that other person. So that's how it isn't 100% on the nose of what you ask, but if you're doing all these networking things, every single one is a chance for you to find that person somehow will connect you to the person who's going to hire you. And if you can just, I just find it's a sign of like how alive you are, is how interested you are in other people. And when you see, haven't you seen that before? You see someone and they're just very alive and interested in other people, like, oh, that's really neat. Something about them that it pulls you in. It works that way. Again, this is all opinion, and it isn't the tangibles. It's not the, when you format your resume, you should have 5 lines of skill and only 4. No, whatever. It's who you're being and how you interact with, and frankly, grant respect and acknowledgement to other people. That stuff matters. Does that help?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's where I thought of networking, and or just it seemed like I guess in some ways I wanted to be like some sort of linear, like
yes, yeah. I wish networking was linear. I mean, and this is the thing that salespeople from time immemorial have wanted, is like, where's that magic thing where I find the person who can say yes, right? Sorry, no, you just need to meet people and get in touch with them, So yeah, I hope I'm glad that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Do you have a question?
Well, yeah, basically answer that last part.
Okay. Have we met? Go ahead, Michelle.
That's much a question, but just you talking about networking and going to all the meetups and stuff. And then I just wanted to comment that every job I've gotten since I left Tech Academy has come because I've met somebody at a meetup. And just been in that community and stuff like that. And that it's been easier for me to make those connections when I do need them. So people can tell when you're like hunting for a job or you're searching for a job, and that's the only reason you're kind of there. and they're a lot less interested as opposed to when you're just like, oh yeah, I'm just a student, I'm learning these things, and I think this technology is super cool, and then you know them, and you kind of see them around for like a month or two, and then all of a sudden you're complaining about something because you're really good job, because you want some cool new computer game, you can't get it because you have a job, and your friend's like, hey, actually, we're hiring, why don't you go talk to my manager, and they drag you over to talk to your manager, you get hired, like, randomly out of meetup. But it's definitely like, just making those connections before you meet them has been a lot easier than trying to make them as you do meet them. So go early. Like I've talked to a lot of students from here who say that they don't know enough yet. They're too early in the program to go to meetups, and there's no such thing. Like you're here, you're interested in technology, just go.
That's great advice. And I watched you. I watched you do that. Very, very proud. It's very cool.
I don't want you to go into anymore.
For those of you at home, her boss just said she can't go to any more meetups. That's awesome. That's awesome. Oh man, and yeah, buy all of her video games from now on. Anybody else have anything? Yeah, go ahead.
This is more of a personal question about it.
Yeah.
How did you get into software development? Because I know from a small town that it's not really a TV presence, so is it?
Yeah.
So how did you get everybody?
We're from the same town, by the way, which is extremely rare because we grew up in a town of 5,000 people in the middle of nowhere on the California coast. My dad programmed computers, he programmed IBM computers in the 60s. He didn't continue on with his career, but when I was 11 years old, he took $200 that we absolutely couldn't afford. I was relatively aware of the fact that we were poor is a pretty good description of it, right? I don't know where he pulled $200 from. But he bought what's called a VIC-20, and a VIC-20 was a little computer made about 1981-82 by a Canadian company called Commodore. And a VIC-20 was about the size of that right there, and it was a home computer, $200, right? Why did I become how did I get into technology? It wasn't that, oh, Dad brought home a computer. It's that he showed it to me for about 5 minutes and plugged it into the computer, into the TV. That was our model, was the TV. And he showed me, look, and here it starts up, and I'm like, oh, that's cool. And he said, okay, now watch this. And unplugged it, and turned it over, and took out a screwdriver, and now he's getting excited. He unscrewed it and took off the back, and he said, okay. That's called a motherboard. This is basically the brains of the outfit. And see how this whole thing it's on is connected to where we plugged in the TV, and this one's connected to where we plugged in, where we plugged in this tape drive. Yes, a tape drive. Don't make fun of me. Okay. He says it needs to be able to communicate with all these things because it's got to manage the whole deal. Oh, cool. And so yeah, it's working with data. So you need somewhere to store it. And that's why we have this tape thing. It just lays down the data so then you can pull it back later on. In other words, what he did was he took away the mystery for me. He made it so it's like, oh, it's just a machine. And that's what we tried to do with this school, is we want this to not be a mystery. There shouldn't be any mystery about it. A computer is just a machine. It is no easier or more difficult to understand than any other machine if you recognize that it's just a machine. If you think that it's magic, you're screwed. Because it's not. It's a completely understandable machine. So that's where it started. I went, oh my God. And then he taught me binary, ones and zeros. And then he taught me assembler language. And so he just made it fun and easy, And then high school, the Macintosh came out, the Lisa. Okay, I'm old. Okay, and I went, oh wow, look at this graphical interface. It's fun. And then I went in the Navy, learned nuclear power and computers, and electronics, and all that kind of stuff. And it just that's how it started though. His dad taking away the mystery for me. It's the best $200 he ever spent. I gotta pay him back. Does that help? Good. Anybody else have anything? Yes, sir.
Is there anything you recommend for continuing education or something like once we finish the course?
Oh, great question. Yeah, he asks, is there anything I'd recommend for continuing education once you finish the course? Absolutely, do it. Okay, all joking aside, absolutely have a plan and a point of view about this. You need to be continually learning. You are not going to get equipped in 4 to 5 months of schooling here with everything you're going to need. That's the first part is far from it. There's a lot to learn. The second part of it is, technology changes at an unbelievably rapid pace. Serverless architecture. A year and a half, 2 years ago, people were like, what? No. Now it is a thing, and it's a very valuable thing. It's pretty cool, right? So you should do it. Now, how you approach that is completely up to you. Here's a few things I found pretty helpful. When a new technology comes down the pike and you want to kind of learn something about it, take a weekend and do it. What I found successful is to find a tutorial about it that seems to be decently written and do the tutorial with absolutely no variations or extra kind of things thrown in. Just do the tutorial and do it line by line and type every bit of code yourself, just so you can kind of see how all these pieces and parts fit together. I say that because I've seen another approach where you take a look at it and you're like, oh, that's cool. Let me think up a really cool thing to build with this technology. Why? You're not trying to build that thing. You're trying to learn that technology. So take advantage of the fact that somebody else did that hard work and just learn how the technology works. And then phase 2, if you want to, build your own thing. It's just one little tip, but I found that to be really, really valuable. When I was learning MVC 5-6 years ago, I didn't try to invent some brand new application. I just went, everything says nerd dinner. There's this project called Nerd Dinner. Okay, I will do Nerd Dinner. And I'm really glad I just did it that way, because there's some really complex ways to try to learn MVC, and that wasn't. That was simple and clean and clear. So does that help answer that question?
Yeah, and I mean, like even certificate-wise, or I mean,
Yeah.
Junior college programs.
He's asking like certificate-wise, junior college programs. You know what? If you want.
Yes.
If you want. I don't have a degree. A lot of developers I work with have a degree, and a lot of them don't. There's certain aspects of the fundamentals of computer science that, frankly, I would like to even know more about. I might get a degree sometime. It's never stopped me from getting a job. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, do I want to do that? If I did, it would be because there's holes in, like, there's things that I just love the knowledge of. It isn't because I'm not going to get hired if I don't. That's me. For you, it may be you want that, maybe a Microsoft cert or something for, certified solutions developer or whatever, right? Get it. It's absolutely not going to hurt, and it will provide a framework that drives you continuing to educate yourself in technology. To that degree alone, it's valuable. In fact, from that point of view, why not have the things you do in terms of your own self-study be oriented to a degree, to a cert? Because you'll just start to accumulate lots of certs. A big old section on your resume that says certs. It's not going to hurt you. So, does that help kind of answer that? Okay, good. Yes?
I was curious to know, your international connectivity, do you think it's exactly the same thing that everywhere around the world should learn from what you're teaching? I'm just curious, or is it slightly different than you're teaching there, both in content and delivery, and also, just the future trajectory for.
That's a great question. For those of you remote, what she's asking essentially is, in terms of the approach we have here, in terms of content and how we approach teaching and the non-technical aspects of our program, how well do they apply in other places around the world, essentially? Is that kind of what you're asking?
Even the technical side.
Even the technical side.
I mean, is it, whatever, is the same thing trending everywhere simultaneously?
That's a good question. Is the same thing trending everywhere simultaneously? The answer to that is I don't know and I don't care. Now, let me explain what I mean by that, okay? Because I've been doing this thing for long enough, I know that virtually every technology is, to a certain degree, a flash in the pan. And what I mean by that is even the technologies that become quite entrenched, very, very in use, do have a shelf life. Now, I can't envision a time where we won't use hypertext markup language to create, documents for the web. That one might be pretty well entrenched. But here's an example. You guys are learning C# on the program. 2001 is when that came out. That's really not very long ago. And it took a long time to gain any kind of traction in the marketplace. The chances that 20 years from now that C# will be one of the primary programming languages in use are actually pretty low if you're going to play the odds. So I knew all that going in. And so I wasn't interested actually in what is it that's like popular now and in what geographical areas. Although I'm not going to teach you COBOL that was used for mainframes in the 70s, okay? What I was more interested in is, okay, there's about 5 separate tool types that a developer should have in their toolkit. They should be able to have a good scripting language for writing automation tools They should definitely know the language of the web in terms of HTML and CSS so you can style it. They absolutely should have some sort of an object-oriented programming language that you can use to develop very, very large, complex applications that benefit from the principles of object-oriented programming, right? And they should have, they should definitely have a way to be able to work with databases. Typically that means relational databases, although there's a whole move to non-relational databases. But you should have these types of tools. That's what I knew to be true. And what I knew was if we teach someone one or two examples of each and they're comfortable using them, and we teach them the principles behind why that is a type of tool you should know, that when they go into their first job and all 4 or 5 of those things are different examples than what they learned in school, they're going to be okay. That was our goal. You go to a place where they don't use Microsoft SQL Server, but they use Postgres, which is relatively similar, or MySQL, where they don't use C#, but they use Java, which has a very comparable code base and applicability set. They don't use HTML and CSS. Yeah, they're probably going to use HTML and CSS. But you see what I mean? There would be like almost no match in terms of the specific technology, but the principles behind it, it would be a great match. So that's part of why I say I don't know and I don't care in terms of what's going on around the world is everywhere you're going to make any sort of application in this modern era, it's going to take advantage of one or more of those tools. And if you can think with that, then you'll do well. Does that answer that question for you?
And then in delivery, are you curious, because it's self-paced, does your approach vary if it's delivered in different countries?
She's saying in terms of our approach of education, the fact that it's self-paced, does our approach vary in different countries? Absolutely not. No, we don't vary anything about how we actually conduct the program for any of our remote students. We have students all over the world. Because this is just a personal thing for me. I think it's a cop-out to let a student go past the point they don't understand something and hope they'll kind of gain it by osmosis or something later on down the line. I think that's a failure on the part of the educator. That's my personal point of view, that if you dig in and figure out what it is about that subject or the one immediately prior that the person didn't understand, you'll solve it for them. And if you don't, you're letting them down. Now, I also think the student is letting themselves down by being willing to compromise and go, I've kind of maybe sort of got that, but I'm just going to ignore that uncertainty and move on. That's on you as well. That's my personal point of view as an educator, developed over about 30 years. So we probably, we don't shift that for different points in the world. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't had anybody ask about the philosophy behind how we do this thing. I've taken up a lot of extra time, and I appreciate that. Right? I see people have like their studies to get to, and I've got a guest here that I'm keeping because I talk too much. So I'm going to cut off right now. If you guys have anything separate, just see me afterwards. I have no problem with it. Thank you all very much for taking time out of your studies to do this. And again, a hand for our guest. I really appreciate that time. All right, buddy.
Hey, quick note, there's still pizza if you walk around too. Help yourself. Soda, pizza, coffee.
Yeah, it's very easy to do.
You know, I've worked at a bunch of conferences, so maybe it's one myself.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I usually have script up.
You did great. I think she did. Did you do that?
I did as when I was working.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
I also sometimes get roped into talking at other meetups and stuff. I'm always up for it. If it's Saturday, it's...
A couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
No, I didn't.
Thanks.
I got it.
Everyone's so great.
Oh, it is a group. Right.
We're pretty excited.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to work.
Oh.
It's just
It's okay.
It's
It's a good try.
That's building a project. It's also like
Yes.
you don't see it once in a lifetime. Full stack, like
like right now, mostly it's I haven't built anything on the back end. So
okay.
moving into the back end at some point. Right now, I do a lot of the front end and make it look a little nicer.
Congratulations. Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you. It's very exciting.
A lot ahead of us.
Yeah.
It's early days.
So what, was it just you guys were, so you were at New Relic, you and your
Chase.
you guys just found a hole that in the market?
Yeah, we actually left Europe. We stayed until the IPO, which was about 3 years ago.
Okay.
Or 2 years ago. And then we left. I worked at GitHub.
Oh, wow.
And are in the data science program. My background is more we had Chase and I always said, hey, we're going to work together. And we were working on this one project. We wanted to build like a data ingestion pipeline, something we had built at New Relic, but we wanted to see if it could which is basically this idea of throw any data and like retrieve it back instead of having and it turned out that there's a lot of ways to do that. We're in the process of building it. We're working with them. We're like, whoa, it's weird. It's weird. So let's go function. Okay, yeah. Well, so it's kind of they're based on the same principle. Creating a function, like a lambda in Python is like lambda
I think that just started it.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot. Yeah, but all of our graduates.
I have Jesus card. But I didn't hear that. Hello. I like your necklace.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Yeah. I didn't hear us talk.